English translation 597th contact Thursday, the 25th of September 2014, 22:03 hours.
There you are, Ptah. Greetings and welcome. I was just talking to Silvano and Madeline in the kitchen when you called.
Greetings to you too, Edward, my friend. Also today I am not alone because Quetzal will come soon, because he has been outdoors for quite some time and inspects all shrubs, trees, and bushes in the terrain. In the meantime, I want to get straight to the point, which is why I am coming here today, precisely with regard to your question, which you have recently raised in connection with your work, which you can hardly cope with anymore. After careful consideration and discussion, we agreed that the situation in question had changed radically in such a way that, on the one hand, there was a certain amount of work overload, and on the other, there was a shortage of labor. As a result, certain workers find themselves in a situation where they are unable to do what is necessary satisfactorily within a reasonable period of time. It must also be taken into account that no excessive demands are made on the work performance and that the necessary leisure time for everything personal is not impaired. So it requires a significant change in the sense that in the future, not only the core group members alone will carry out all the necessary missionary work, but also that passive group members will be included in it from now on. We have thought of all written work, which is done by hand, machine, or computer, but also especially with regard to all work, which includes everything concerning computer science.
That's good, because we're really short the longer, the more members can do this kind of work, so we need to change that. We cannot and must not overload the members with work, which is why it is urgently necessary that we can use more people to carry out the work that arises, especially in relation to paperwork and IT, as you say. Handicraft work, which requires good physical strength, is actually less necessary nowadays, because these are usually done on the first Saturday of the month by the core group members, but also during the year by passive members, who each do their annual 3-day work in the center. Today it is rare for us to have to do heavy physical work at other times, which requires an extraordinary amount of manpower. The construction of the center has progressed so far that the big things have been done, and we no longer have to strive for everything in the strict way that was necessary at the time of construction. So today we can take it more comfortably and arrange everything so that it... Oh, Quetzal, greetings and be welcomed. Ptah told me you were out in the field.
I greet you too. Yes, I spent a good 3/4 of an hour in the field and inspected everything with regard to the bushes, trees, and shrubs. On the whole, I am satisfied. But there are still some things that I want you to see, so that everything can still be done. What I am not satisfied with, however, is the garden and the large greenhouse. There is a lack of proper maintenance of the garden in terms of tillage, because obviously there is a lack of proper understanding and knowledge, which is why I would like to see you supervise it.
I can, but only in such a way that I see to it that everything is done right. But I want to use Silvano as well, as I have to instruct Daniela as well.
My opinion is that you should not do the gardening yourself, but only order and supervise it. I cannot and must not expect your state of health to work in the garden.
That's good, because I wouldn't know if I could take it anymore. I wouldn't have any problems with my strength, but I am constantly under medication, as you know, because some things are no longer as good as they should be from a health point of view. So I am glad that I can at least do everything necessary on the computer, as well as with regard to the weekly shopping of food, but also with regard to all the administrative work, etc., etc. It will also have to be considered that another time there will not be much joy, because now you have something to complain about concerning the garden and the greenhouse.
What you're saying is right. Unfortunately, I have to complain about the big greenhouse, because the plants in it look worse than a wilderness, because there is still a certain order and structure in it. But what I have seen corresponds to chaos and chaotic disorder, which is also ridiculously interspersed with unkempt and proliferating plants that rob the main plants of food, and are not appropriate in a greenhouse in which cucumbers and tomatoes are supposed to grow and prosper. Also, the soil is in a desolate state, Consequently, this must be made arable again, which also refers to the garden soil area. So I recommend that you take responsibility for the greenhouse again, as you have done with Jacobus and Silvano in the past, and have won big and good vegetable harvests.
I also agree with that. But you are not the first person to complain about the condition of the greenhouse, because during the last few months various people, not only core group members but also passive members, did so, as did a foreign couple who looked at the garden, got lost behind the greenhouse, looked into it and was shocked, as I was told when I was approached by the two people on the Biotope campground.
I can understand that, but now I want to look at what still has to be done with you in the field. It won't take more than 15-20 minutes.
In the meantime, I'm going to stay here and read this book you gave me to read.
I was going to tell you on your last visit, but I forgot. You can keep the book because I got myself a new one.
Thank you, then I'll put it in my aircraft to clean it.
Well, let's go now.
Sure. Here I am again. Quetzal has already gone his own way because everything is clear. But if you don't have to leave too, then I have a question that concerns me.
My time is somewhat limited today, but it is enough for a shorter conversation.
Good. Then the following. Recently, I got involved in a conversation about timeouts taken to satisfy needs. We in the core group also have this possibility for up to 7 years with regard to a certain exemption from tasks and obligations, etc. Now, however, the question was raised to what extent a timeout would be justified, which would relate to families and communities, friendships, groups and organizations, etc. in general, as well as to the FIGU, in every family, in every friendship and in every acquaintance, as well as in every group, organization, in every association, marriage alliance, as well as in every other community. There are rules into which a member has to insert himself if order, peace, freedom, and harmony, and equally also interpersonal relationships are to function and be maintained. However, if a member does not want to fit into these rules, because he refuses to recognize the right of order, precisely because of the unworthiness, egoism, self-assertion, and self-righteousness, etc., which inevitably lead to false attacks, accusations, and quarrels, then this does not justify an alleged timeout, because such is something else, and serves a certain and necessary purpose. It is therefore not a timeout, I think, because the only right way can only be for man to face the problems that arise in him, which basically emanate only from himself, if he does not fit into the rules, or simply does not want to fit in. So he has to work on himself and change his attitude for the better, instead of avoiding the problems working in him, and thus also his own responsibility. This inevitably arises when, by not inserting into the rules and by quarreling, the values of order and peace, freedom and harmony of others are disturbed, and simply with false excuses, accusations, and false self-referential views and self-congratulations of wanting better than others, the cowardly Finch stroke is drawn. In a family, for example, the following can occur: love, peace, freedom, and harmony prevail in and of themselves, but the given order and rules do not fit a family member, so that he simply separates from the family with selfish, autocratic, and self-righteous reasons and goes his own way, to supposedly simply take a time out to reflect, whereby the time out is really not a time out, but an escape from one's own problems. Then this happens as a result of degenerating self-righteousness, as well as out of egoism, in which one is washed up and which is not recognized. Consequently, it also cannot be mastered. So this family member can no longer be said to take responsibility for himself and for the family. The rule proves that a person does not think of the better when he runs away from his own problems, but rather pushes them away on others and therefore continues in the old selfish, self-righteous, and autocratic style. Consequently, he does not return to the family, but becomes more and more alienated from it and constantly deepens his problems. The same applies to other organizations, groups, associations, friendships, marriages, etc., if something arises within the same framework. I do not understand a timeout as an unjustified escape from any situation or obligation, from personal problems, selfishness, self-righteousness and egoism, etc., but as a time which is taken for a certain and important reason and necessity, which can only be satisfied by spending a special and certain time for it, in order to cope with everything, after which one then returns to the previous original state, for example, to family life, etc.
Then I would like to answer your question in the following way also with a word, which is not every day. In my opinion, time off in a family, group or organization, etc., is a time off that is necessary and cannot be circumvented in order to fulfill certain obligations that are not customary and that can take several months or even years. But if an unjustified timeout is taken, which corresponds to an escape, because only quarrels and a non-willingness to insert into good rules and into a fixed order are given, then this corresponds to a sneaking away from responsibility. On the one hand, towards oneself and the problems of their own, as well as of the family, the organization, the grouping, the marriage, the friendship relationship, the association, or the other community. This, of course, always provided that the given rules and the regulation are rightful.
Yes, that is clear to me. But apparently there is a misunderstanding among the people of the Earth here, because such timeouts are, as you say, only intended to be taken out of office for a certain time, if this is necessary for understandable reasons. If, however, the whole thing is based only on self-assertion, self-righteousness, selfishness, egoism and not wanting to insert oneself into the order and the rules, etc., then one can no longer speak of a timeout. But as I said, only of an escape from oneself in cowardice as well as from correct rules and the functioning order, but also from one's own problems and one's own responsibility.
I agree with that, but even though you have said everything fundamentally in good and understandable words, I would also like to make a few comments. A timeout is always connected with a necessity. Therefore, stable reasons must be given for it. Like, for example, the following. 1. Disease of protracted form. 2. Vocational training. 3. Further education school study. 4. Stay abroad for a longer period of time. 5. Existence construction. 6. Care of the sick, etc. 7. Official and military duties. 8. Self-discovery. 9. Performance of obligations of an unavoidable nature. 10. Longer work obligation, for a non-insertion or because of quarrels and personal problems, etc., which are not resolved due to disinterest and lack of will, as well as in relation to quarrels and non-compliance with rules, and in relation to a given order in a family, organization, marriage, group, association, or friendship. Timeouts are not determined, but the whole corresponds in this way to an evasion of personal responsibility. This if there are not massive and clear reasons for a timeout, as I have mentioned before. Non-insertion and quarrels, etc. in any community do not cause timeout, but direct exclusion because it is not timeout but absence and estrangement from vain causes or as a result of evasion of personal commitment by a questionable pro forma justification.
That is so, yes. I know because privately we have already talked about this in detail in the 1990s. It would probably have been better back then if we had had an official discussion on this matter. On the other hand, however, there is now a reason for this, so I would like to say that everything comes at the right time.
That was and is actually what you say it is. In addition to the reasons for time off mentioned above, for example, an unjustified absence inevitably leads to withdrawal from a community, be it a family, friendship, marriage, a people, a group, an association, or an organization. The fact is that an unjustified alleged timeout is nothing more and nothing less than a cowardly escape from one's own responsibility, as you rightly said, and this inevitably leads to alienation from one's family, friendship, marriage, group, club, or organization. Consequently, only an honest, open and clear withdrawal with a final departure of correctness and without cowardice, as if just shabby, dishonest as well as unobjective and untrue reasons for it are cited to justify an alleged timeout that no one such, but a flight from one's own problems and personal responsibility, whereby the problems are left unresolved and continue to exist within the same framework.
In this respect, I have made and experienced such experiences in my life with various people who have simply fled from their responsibility, precisely in the respect that they took unjustifiably alleged timeouts, which corresponded to an escape from personal responsibility. And even with them, it was the case that they gave dishonest reasons, which usually led to a final break with their own family or with a community. And such false timeouts, be it in relation to the family, friendship, a marriage alliance, an association, an organization, politics, or anything else, always bring alienation, as well as fear, anger, sorrow, and worries, which can lead to severe depression, both for those who take such a false timeout and for those affected by it, who, whether they like it or not, must bear the fact of the drift of the timeout person. And it is also a fact that many people live in such a delusion that if they take an unjustified time out from family, friendship, marriage, organization, or any other community, they could go back to it and everything would be better than before. So the delusion prevails that when such a return takes place, everything is different and better than before. But that is a mighty error and an illusion without equal, because when man does not change who has sorted himself out, then everything remains as before. Once a separation has taken place in such a way that it was caused by self-inflicted problems, then nothing can be renewed because there is only a patchwork, and the old relationships that have broken cannot be repaired. Patched stuff usually doesn't last any longer, as for example with a broken jug that is glued together because the glue spots remain permanent, must break spots, which break again at every possible and impossible opportunity. The glued or mended areas thus always remain exposed to the danger that they dissolve and break everything up again. It is the same in a family, a community, a group, an association, an organization, or a friendship, etc., because what has once diverged, for whatever false reasons and problems, cannot be glued again. This is not the case even if, as is usual with those people who do not think logically, it is thought that a new beginning can be created. As a rule, such thoughts do not only correspond to an error and illusion, but they are so illogical that it is howling. Of course, there is always an exception for every rule, but it is so rare and has to be searched like a pin in a big haystack.
Which I can only confirm as well as everything else you've explained. But now, dear friend, it is time for me to go because I still have an obligation to follow. Goodbye, Edward.
Thank you for your time spent on my question and your answer. Goodbye, Ptah.